Hey everyone, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today I'm talking about a projector. This is the XGIMI Horizon Pro. It's a 4K projector that uses LED technology for the illumination, and it retails for $16.99. Now, whether you pay that price or not is a different discussion. It always depends on, when you're buying it and where, 'cause sometimes it goes on sale. But I'll base the review on the retail price of $1,700. As of the time of this review, you can get it as low as $1,500 on Amazon, but again, depending on where you buy it, your prices may vary. So we'll make the assumption that it's $1,700 at MSRP and compare it to another projector, which I'll mention later in the review, that has a similar MSRP, just to kind of show you the differences and, pros and cons. With the LED technology, it actually has they rate it at 110% color gamut for DCI P3 with an ANSI lumen rating of 2200. Now, there's ANSI, there's ISO, there's lumens. There's a lot of variance on ratings, so make sure that if you are doing research on a projector, either take a look at several reviews that compare different models, but don't think that an ANSI lumen is the same as an ISO lumen. So if you convert an ISO lumen to an ANSI, the ANSI number would be lower. So this has 2200 lumens. The projector I'm going to include later in this discussion is rated at 2400 lumens, but that's an ISO. And when you do the conversion, which is not a standard way of converting it because they're measured slightly differently, that one would convert to about 2000 to 2100. So technically just lower than this, even though if you're just looking at lumen rating, that number's higher. But I want to start with the basics though. So this is an Android-based projector. It runs Android TV 10.0, has a Bluetooth remote, lots of inputs and outputs, and a standard thread mount underneath. So they do sell tripod projectors online, and when I say they, Amazon, other retailers, you can buy a lot of projectors stands. Just make sure it's designed to handle the weight of this, which is just over 6 pounds. I was able to use a camera tripod on this, and it was pretty good. It wasn't perfect, but the other projector was heavier, and that did not work. That was extremely dangerous, so it kind of depends on which one you get. The XGIMI Horizon Pro actually has Harman Kardon speakers in it, which is really slick. So naturally, me being an audio person, audio performance is a big thing. Now this supports Dolby and DTS decoding. So let's just start with the inputs and outputs while I'm on that note. So you can see here you have the power input. I want to talk about the power brick next because that's an interesting one. You have an optical out, 2 USBs. These are USB 2.0, HDMI 1 and HDMI 2. The HDMI 1 also serves as ARC, audio return channel, so you can connect this to a receiver and have the lip sync coordinated between the audio and the picture. You have Ethernet. Now this does do wireless 2.4 and 5 gigahertz and Bluetooth, but Ethernet is a nice fallback if you're mounting this in a particular location where it's not getting moved much. The Ethernet's more reliable. And then you have aux output. So I want to talk about the power. That barrel connector is a 7.5 millimeter connector. It's a little bit larger plug, kind of like some certain laptops, depending on the model. Now, this is the total length, if you could see it, of the brick. So my only fault that I have, one of the weird gotchas with this projector is it kept the weight down considering how much power this has and the speakers and all that by putting the power supply outside of the unit, because you can imagine if this was inside it, it would make it larger and heavier. The problem is with that is this is the length you have from where this heavy brick wants to rest on something. If you're using a standard tripod and the projector is mounted up higher, just keep in mind that basically however this cord can reach off the floor is about how high your projector can go, unless you're willing to lift and secure this higher up to reduce that stress. This is a standard C13 power cord. It's grounded, so you can always get a longer one of these or an extension cord if you need to run this longer. If you are trying to extend the barrel, because this is 7.5 millimeter, it's a little bit harder to find the appropriate connection, but I just want to point that out. There's pros and cons of keeping the power supply outside of the unit. That's just one of the cons is the placement. On the note of weird things, there's a couple little things. This is definitely not going to be a negative review, but I, again, want to be honest and open. It didn't come with batteries for the remote, which was odd, and there's no lens cap, which was odd. On the note of the lens, there's no physical optical zoom, if you will. So I didn't know that at first. And once I learned how to get around it, it wasn't as big of a deal, but some people, they want to know that. So what that means is this has a 1.2 throw ratio. So that will affect how far you can put it off the TV and how wide that makes the picture. When I say TV, I meant projection screen. So basically, when you have it, let's say you're putting this behind a couch or a fixed length, you can only move it so far. In default, when you turn it on, if it's farther away, it's going to project beyond your screen, your projection screen that you hopefully purchased to go with it. There's some really amazing technology built into this for auto keystone, auto focus, auto crop, if you will. It's basically a digital zoom. It works exceptionally well. And what's really cool is if this is off to the side like this, let's say your couch is here and this is sitting on a little end table, you can project it sideways or diagonal, if you will, not fully sideways, and it'll automatically adjust. And if you have art on the wall or a picture frame, it will actually crop the picture and move it to make sure that it can still project on your wall without being imposed on by other objects. Now, because this is done digitally, you are starting to condense some of that resolution because it's basically casting the full 4K image and then shrinking the picture digitally to where it needs to fit. That's the difference between optical and digital. Now, if you can get really close to ideal with minimal adjustment, you're going to benefit from the best picture quality. And on that note of picture quality, screens make a massive difference. So you always want to factor in a decent quality screen to go with any projector purchase. And of course, with any projector, lighting makes a difference. So the one I used was a Yardmaster Plus. It's from Elite Screens. I went with a 135 inch because my plan is to use this outside for neighborhood parties. We have the kids come over, etc. So I wanted something bright and robust, and I wanted a screen that would leverage that. My screen has a gain of 1.3. When you're shopping projector screens, just make sure you shoot for 1 or higher. Obviously, you want a quality material that's not going to fall apart either, but the gain is how much brightness you're preserving from the projector. 1 is basically a 1-to-1 brightness, whereas above that is a little bit more reflective surface, and that's going to help make the picture pop as much as possible. Really important on a larger screen, and if your room isn't totally dark, or if this is farther away, it's going to help give you some of that brightness you might be looking for. Now I want to talk about user experience with the XGIMI. This to me, so I look at reviews two ways. I look at products two ways. I look at it for the maximum potential. What can I get out of it from my own experience? I am willing to deal with more troubleshooting or setup and advanced stuff than I think some users are. I'll invest the time to get the most out of whatever I buy. The other part that I look at it as is if someone's going to ask me for a recommendation in a certain price range, whether it's a gaming headset, because I review those, audiophile headphones or stuff like this, what would I recommend? Family. And the first time setup in the everyday use is a huge thing. And these both execute that slightly differently. And there's pros and cons to both. However, when you factor in the price point, the edge to me goes towards XGIMI because, and this projector came out like a year and a half prior to this one. This one came out almost like, when you start looking at product launches and what projectors were doing, this kind of followed suit with this. Now there's different specs. This is a laser projector versus LED. The usually laser is brighter and more vivid. The actual rating of this is an ISO, and this is what I was talking about earlier. In real life, it's almost the same, if not slightly darker compared to the XGIMI. Now the color saturation is really strong on the laser. I notice it's really, really rich color. Doesn't mean it's necessarily accurate. It's kind of like comparing a Samsung TV to a Sony using the same technology. The Sony is a little bit more refined. You get a more natural looking picture, whereas something like the Anchor Nebula or Samsung TV, if you will, they boost color saturation. It'd be fun for kids' movies, but if you're watching, something with real people, it might look a little unnatural. Now you can turn some of that down, but this is where it gets odd. So on the XGIMI, the Horizon Pro, the entire projector and software operating system, Android, it's a single cohesive unit. The processor's built in. It has 2 gigs of RAM. It has 32 gigs of storage, flash storage. This is 2 gigs of RAM, 16 gigs of storage. But I want to talk about how the remotes and everything tie into this. So because it's all built in, this one remote is basically doing everything. You have your power, you have your settings, you have the Google Voice Assistant, which all works perfectly. This little button down here is like an auto setup for the keystone and image correction I was talking about. You have this nice wheel, volume, home, the settings or alt menu, if you will, and back. And this is all aluminum. It's really nice. Like I said, I wish it came with batteries. That was kind of odd. It just runs on 2 AAA, so it should last a while. And it's a Bluetooth connection to the Horizon Pro, which means you don't need line of sight. Really important for situations like what I discussed. If the kids are watching a movie and there's people in the way and I have to turn the volume up or down or pause it, this is going to have a good connection up to about 30, 50 feet away. So the performance is great. Now, that means because this is all a single unit, the on-screen menu, the customization, dialing in the picture quality, changing things, it's all in one interface. This is like the weirdest thing I've seen. So I want to show you why. One, I do like the remote, even though it's simple and it's plastic. I do want to call out some pluses that it actually has the apps, popular apps built in. You have YouTube, Netflix, Disney Plus, and Prime Video. This is a fairly easy remote to use. It's similar feel to like a Roku or a Fire Stick remote. But on that, check this out. And this thing's about 3 or 4 pounds heavier. So this is what I was talking about earlier. I couldn't use this on my projector I was using on the Horizon Pro. This just like fell forward. The ball mount couldn't support the weight. So check this. So it has a power supply built in, which is nice, especially because this is a much larger unit, a single HDMI and a single USB. So you have more control here. There's no Ethernet on the Nebula. It does have aux, but check this. When I slide this up and pop this cover up, this box is the streamer. Your entire operating system, all the specs I talked about, is on this unit. Now, there's pros to that in a sense that this works with Netflix. Whereas, for some reason, because of the whole DRM thing and how different companies and streaming services validate devices, XGIMI used to have a workaround with Netflix. It doesn't seem to be working right now. Most of the apps were great, but some apps didn't because of certification processes. And this might be like the workaround by having a separate streaming stick to get past that and still have Netflix support. However, the Amazon Prime Video, I hope I'm saying it. I don't use it often if you can't tell. But the Amazon Prime Video and occasionally Disney did not work. Now, this even has a Disney button. However, a lot of the times whenever I'd click on it, it would just say not connected to internet, even though other apps were working totally fine. And when I looked at reviews online, that was not an isolated situation. I've seen multiple people have issues with the apps not always working. So what makes this odd is your remote is a Bluetooth connection to that streaming stick or puck, if you will, not the projector. The projector is a separate unit, and that is connected via a micro HDMI. The projector has this little infrared eye on the back. So when I have to adjust anything on the projector, I have to point at it. Because the projector is separate, I had to program the remote through the Android OS streaming stick so I could tell it that this TV device was what it was so it can communicate via the IR code. There's a little IR blaster, which means I have to point it directly at the projector. Until you set all of that up, you can't control a lot of the features on the projector. Now, I do like that the controls on the Anchor Nebula have this little illuminated setup here. You can press the power button once while it's on to suspend it or put it in standby, or press and hold to fully shut it down. So you can activate and go through some of the menus on this. That's going to control the projector. Once you pair it successfully, you can use the remote to control the projector again like a TV, but it's not as cohesive. And I had issues where I got the remote set up, but I couldn't get the volume to change or access the keystone and image settings. This does have its own auto keystone software. It's a 4-point. It didn't work as seamlessly as this. This seemed to be more precise. I'll show you the video, obviously, of the differences. But here's the thing. Because I had issues setting it up, because I still had issues with apps not working, this, even though, yes, Netflix works out of the box, the hassle I had to go through to get this to work was enough that if a family member asked me under $2,000, what projector would you get? I would just go with the XGIMI. Because one, it's cheaper. It was still brighter, and it was much easier to use. That's the killer thing for me. So I'm not dunking on the Anchor Nebula. There's a couple things I did like more on the Nebula. Like I said, I think the remote is seemingly easier to use. You have a more logical button layout, and I like the shortcuts. The speakers on the Horizon, the Nebula 4K, the speakers are louder and a little bit more bassy on this. but, and this has more power, but this one still gets extremely loud, but the spatial audio in the stereo effect is much better. This still gets really loud. Like I couldn't pass 50% volume in this office, for example, and out in the living room, I typically use my surround system. However, I could still make this more than loud enough, which means it can serve well outside. This might be slightly louder outside, but again, it's just going to sound like more of a mono style approach versus a better imaging stereo effect. So it all depends where you sit in your environment, but that was the difference I noticed from sound quality. Now, sound is a big discussion, and so is audio delay, video delay. And when you have, so like this has game mode, it has sports mode, your standard, your movie. This has several modes as well. I noticed that most of the modes didn't affect input lag. They seemed to be like 40 milliseconds and up, regardless of what setting. Game didn't really improve anything over standard. It just changed a couple contrast brightness settings. There was a much more noticeable impact, and you have more controls over dialing in your picture on the Horizon Pro. There's motion interpolation, so if you have a sports game and you want the motion to be as smooth as possible and less of a jitter effect, this can do some of that. Anytime you add motion processing, you increase input lag because it's processing the image before displaying it. If you put it in game mode, it drops down to about 34 milliseconds, which actually is a lot of fun for gaming. So, of course, I had to try it, and I played Call of Duty on 135 inches of glory with my surround sound system and Dolby Atmos. It was insane. The only thing I'm going to say is if you're a Call of Duty player or you're playing these games, when you get flashbang, which is like a white grenade, a grenade that lights the screen up in white, it is so bright on 2200 lumens at a higher brightness setting on a 135-inch screen with a 1.3 gain. It lit up the room. You'd think I turned on lights, and it was almost like you have to wear sunglasses like you were really flashbanged. It was pretty intense. So, but input lag wise, I was much more competitive on the XGIMI because 34 milliseconds is manageable. Is it as good as a gaming monitor or an OLED? No. The standard Horizon, the 1080p version, actually has an input lag under 15 milliseconds, which is much closer to a competitive television set. So if you want a projector, maybe consider that if it's more used, for gaming. But as you could see in the video, I was able to still have a lot of fun playing Call of Duty, and I got the aim dialed in pretty fast. I struggled with the Nebula. It was always just slightly longer, and it was kind of like I was chasing my gun around the screen. So I wouldn't really recommend that one for gaming. Even in game mode, it helped a little, but it wasn't as good as the Horizon Pro. So I want to talk about movie performance and fan noise, actually, because that's also a big thing with projectors. Decibel-wise, laser is a little bit more efficient, which means it doesn't need as much fan noise to cool it. You can operate with less airflow. So I expected this one to be quieter, and especially, I believe on spec, this had a lower decibel rating. However, what's interesting is, depending on how it's measured, this is more of a traditional fan noise, like you hear a little bit of the fan. It's a softer sound, and all of the air gets expelled out of the back. This one, it expels the heat out of the side of the unit, not the rear. But there was a slight buzz to the Nebula. Whereas the Horizon had no buzz, it was just like a wind sound. So regardless of what it measures like to the human ear, this is perceived to be a quieter box, which makes a difference in a movie on a quieter setting. When I did play movies, both of these were great. I mean, they have a similar contrast, they have a similar brightness and lumen rating, so you're going to have a similar movie experience. I think the XGIMI, because of the advanced settings for picture adjustment, some people may dial this in better to their liking, but out of the box, they have a similar presentation for picture. The blacks are crushed a little bit because it is a rear projector. It's not crazy high contrast of brightness like the larger, more expensive units. So movies like Ford vs. Ferrari or Blade Runner, they are going to look a little bit darker in the dark scenes. Like the blacks don't have as much detail and levels of darkness to it. It's kind of like combined or crushed. That's what that means. However, in all the bright scenes, it was still more than dynamic. And I found the color saturation to be excellent. Again, on both, skin tones were a little bit more natural on this. This seems to have a little bit more pop in color. So that can kind of come down to preference, but I was really happy with movies. On sports, luckily I had this during the Super Bowl setup, and and is, I didn't like the ending of the Super Bowl, of course. I don't think a lot of people did. So anticlimactic, but it did great there. And I think like the whole sports and motion interpolation thing, it's more evident when a ball gets thrown up in the air and the camera pans to follow it. When you're trying to throw a Hail Mary at the end of the game and the ball doesn't quite go in the air. I don't know if you watch the game. So anyway, motion interpolation is just that. It's going to make that look a little bit smoother. You're not going to have a ghosting effect. You're not going to have a jitter. And that's why I like the sports mode. I found that the standard mode was fine for basically everything except gaming. I really struggled to game on this unless I was in game mode because of all that image processing. So take that for what you will. Now, I do want to talk about an interesting point because some people might hear that, no Netflix, not for me. Well, it has 2 HDMI inputs, and this is about $300 to $400 less than something like this. You get, again, a similar experience. It's not a drastic change, but this is less. So you can have, if you buy the Apple TV, which is about $130 if you get the 3rd gen 32 gig model, now you can cast, because this is Android-based, Android and Google phones can cast to this no problem. It supports Chromecast. But if you have an iPhone and you want to see your phone screen on the projector or use any of the cast capabilities that Apple has, you can buy a $130 Apple TV, and it even has a similar design to this. Just set it right on top or next to it and plug it in on the back. And still for less money, now you have everything. And obviously with Apple TV, it's going to feel very snappy and all the apps will work, including Netflix. I did find that both of these were very responsive. I basically torture tested it, and I opened, once I got all my apps set up, I'd cycle between 6 to 10 apps without closing anything, quickly open it, hit home, go to the next one, hit home, go to the next one. I just kept going through over and over, and both of these handled that well. So this one listed the quad-core processor. This one didn't list the processor spec, but I'd imagine it's comparable just based off the feel. So as far as like smoothness and loading apps, it's extremely fast and responsive. Now, for your 3D fanatics out there, the Horizon Pro does support 3D, and it actually includes frame stacking, which is the better technology for 3D. You do have to buy the XGIMI glasses online. I think they're about $30 or so, but take a look on the website because prices always change. I'll have a link in the description below so you can take a look. But that can give you a 3D experience. It supports HDR, as did the Nebula. This does HDR10, but it also has HLG, which is a little bit better. Again, it depends on the content that you're watching to use that or not. I mentioned the input lag earlier in audio, and this is the big thing. So this has ARC, which is audio return channel. That supports lip sync. What I had an issue with on the Nebula is when you ran like 60 FPS content, like if you're watching a YouTube video with 60 FPS, for example, there was lip sync issues because the streamer is decoupled from the projector. It's like there's a TV versus the projector. The audio wasn't in line, which was super annoying. It's not really an issue on most apps that you stream that are like 24 to 30 frames a second. Whereas because this is all one unit, I had no audio lip sync issues. ARC, or audio return channel, helps preserve that as well because it can communicate the screen's output time versus the audio, and it can line it up. That's what the lip sync is. And then in game mode, the reason why I'm bringing all this up is because if you're using the aux out or the optical out, you're not preserving that lip sync data anymore. It's basically however the projector sends it and then your audio device. And a lot of the sound bars and receivers have an input lag adjustment, a delay setting. You can go 10 milliseconds to 30, for example, 50 milliseconds to manually line it up. However, if this is in game mode and you're not looking to, set it up or your audio device doesn't support it, game mode is close enough to real time that even without adding a manual delay to your audio device, you should still have a good lip sync performance. So if you are having that issue and you don't have the equipment to adjust the time delay on your audio device and it seems like the voice is off, switch the projector to game mode. It should nearly fix your problem. You lose the motion interpolation setting, but because this is a DLP-based projector, the motion performance is excellent anyway, and now the voices and audio, they're all linked up to the lips, and that's a lot less distracting and more pleasant to enjoy. So that about wraps up the review. I don't normally review projectors. I'm a huge tech audio game nerd. I use the tech all the time, and I tend to over-research stuff. I make spreadsheets for everything. But at the end of the day, people aren't like me. They use the product. You buy something, you just want to use it. And the XGIMI Horizon Pro, that's what stood out the most, is the execution of it. And it's something I didn't even think about until I tried using the Nebula from Anker, because that setup process was so much more cumbersome and lengthy to do that I thought I did something wrong. And that's from someone who plays with tech all day. So I want to commend XGIMI on that. And this, considering this came out like a year and a half prior to some of the competitors' product using a similar product offering, this is still less money. And when you're recommending stuff to viewers or family members, this is the type of product I recommend, because you can unbox it, set it up rather quickly, and go. And as long as you know some of the few shortcomings it has between the actual optical zoom adjustment or the Netflix issue and the workarounds, you can still be set up to have a great product. Now, I do want to end by saying, please don't forget the screen. The screen that this projects to is such an important piece that often gets overlooked, and don't buy a $50 screen on Amazon and expect the best performance from your Horizon Pro. You don't have to buy a 135-inch Elite screen, which sells for $500, but getting something with a gain of at least 1.0 at the screen size you like is going to make a massive difference. So factor that into your budget as well. XGIMI rates the Horizon Pro from 60 to 150 inches. I can see 150 working totally fine as long as your room is not too bright, of course. But at the 135, I had no issues thinking like, man, I wish this was brighter, or it doesn't seem sharp or anything like that. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching this review. I hope you found it helpful and learned a little bit more about projectors, and in particular the Horizon Pro. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I have a lot of different tech, audio, and gaming content out there, and I'd love to see you at the next video. So with that being said, I'll see you next time. Bye.